Welcome to the Purple Warriors podcast. I'm Ali Sugars, your host, and thank you so much for joining me. This podcast is about raising awareness for domestic abuse by allowing survivors to share their own stories and journeys to recovery. It's also about assisting fellow survivors to give you practical yet powerful information that will help you on the road to your recovery. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello everybody, today we have a very exciting guest on. We have Kylie Mangan from Burke Mangan Lawyers with us today. Kylie is an accredited specialist family lawyer who works a lot with victims, or as I like to call them, survivors of domestic violence, and the perpetrators as well. So today we're going to speak about family law and how that might work in a DV situation. So welcome, Kylie.
Thanks, Ali. It's great to be here, and I really hope I can provide some informative information to you.
I have absolutely no doubt that you can. And so maybe before we get started, Kylie, if you can just elaborate a bit on what you do and who you work with, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I have been in law for approximately 19 years and working specifically in family law for about 10 years. It was about 6 years ago when we opened our own practice, and the majority of my work is family law, and we work with a number of charities whereby we get domestic violence survivors coming our way that we assist. But as you said before, we also work with the perpetrators. So that really informs what I have to say today in respect of how to approach the situation if you're coming out of that type of relationship.
Which I think is going to be really, really valuable information. So, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you also told me that you do something else. Would you mind mentioning that? Because this just fascinates me.
So I think what you're referring to is that I'm an arbitrator.
Yes.
So not only do I advise and represent people in relation to family law, but I've also got the power to make binding decisions with the consent of both parties. Arbitration it's an alternative to going to court, because at the moment, if you approach the courts for a decision in your family situation, you're probably going to be waiting 2 to 3 or even 4 years for a judge to become available. So what's happening at the moment is more and more people are choosing arbitration, which is it's choosing the judge of your choice, which is an arbitrator. It's not a judge, it's an arbitrator. But it's a specialist family lawyer who has the power to hear both sides and make binding decisions, and they can do that very quickly. You certainly don't have to be waiting anywhere near what you're waiting if you go through the courts.
I think that is absolutely amazing, and I think, as I said to you when we spoke previously, that I wish that was around maybe 20 years or so ago when I went through all everything.
Yeah. It's very helpful, and it's very new. It's just in the beginning stages.
Excellent. That is really good. So no doubt you certainly have the background to answer some questions that I've got for you today. So let's start off with a reasonably basic one. So maybe if you can answer, what stage do your clients tend to come to you for advice?
So I'm going to answer this question in the context of relationships involving domestic violence.
Beautiful.
People tend to come to us when they're feeling overwhelmed, threatened, or scared about the security of their family. And usually with victims, they come to us either just before they've left the relationship, where they're seeking to get all of their affairs in order because they know the person they're dealing with. They know that person's going to make things hard for them. And so they want to set themselves up as best they possibly can legally prior to their departure. Okay. Yeah. What I mean by this is often the perpetrators of domestic violence, they exert a measure of control and pressure over their victim. And the victim is concerned to take action that will lead to the least likely threat to them in a legal sense. And that is because they know that whatever they do, the perpetrator is going to use something against them in court.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
People just don't know what their rights are. People don't know whether they're allowed to remove their children from the home. And if they do, whether they're compelled to hand their children over to spend time with the other party. People don't know whether they're allowed to take their personal belongings from their home. So there's a whole range of questions that people are frightful of prior to leaving. So we give a lot of advice in that sort of situation. But the other types of inquiries we get are from people who have just recently left a domestic violent relationship, and they're primarily concerned with the security of their children. And that's usually in the context of the other party asserting certain rights that they have, entitlements to the children, when that's not in a legal sense the case, but the victims want to put measures in place as quickly as possible to stop the other parent from, say, turning up to school and just taking off with the children, or turning up to daycare. And you'll find that schools and daycares, when put in the middle of that situation, they respond quite differently. Some of them will release the children to the other parent, even when there's allegations of domestic violence, and others won't. So it's a bit of potluck with who you're dealing with, who your service provider is, and that's one of the reasons that people come to us for advice, just having left a relationship. With perpetrators, they quite often come to us for advice when they've been told that they can no longer see their children.
Wow, there is just so much in that alone, really, isn't there? That's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm maybe going to reorder the questions a little bit here in that case.
Okay.
So you mentioned that, if people might be afraid to remove the children from the home or something like that. So what if a person feels the need to maybe leave the state for their own safety, or even the country, heaven forbid, what, if any, implications does that have legally on families?
So this is a really difficult question, and it's a decision that should not be made lightly and should not be made without taking legal advice. And the reason is because if you pack up and leave with your children and you move interstate or you move overseas and you don't have consent of the other party, then there's a very real risk that if that other party approaches the court and asks for a return order, that you'll be forced to return. And this is in circumstances where you're alleging terrible abuse, where you've just spent every last penny relocating, and you've settled the children in or settled yourself in, and you still run the risk of being returned to where you came from. So with international relocations, our government gets involved, and our government speaks to the government in the country that the person has gone to, and they will force a return to occur. We saw this with the children in Queensland, I think it was, a number of years ago.
Yeah, I think so.
So if you are feeling like you need to move interstate and it's urgent, meaning you can't wait for 2 to 3 years for the court to make a decision, you should really approach the court for an urgent interim order. And that is because moving interstate or moving overseas is deemed to be what's called a major long-term decision. And it's a decision where parties are expected to come to agreement, make the decision by consent, and failing consent to obtain a court order. So really, it's in everybody's best interest if you can't agree to obtain an order. So then when you do move, you can rest assured that you're not going to be forced to return.
Right, yeah, and I suppose even backstepping a little bit, so it would be very similar, I would think, similar advice you would give to someone who's worried about shared parenting or custody issues, not necessarily leaving the state or, the country, but would it be kind of like the same thing?
No, that's different. That's
okay.
Different.
All right.
Yeah. So because if you're moving interstate, you're making a decision that is inherently going to make it more difficult for a child to spend time with that other parent. So that's why that's deemed to be a major long-term decision, okay?
Yeah.
But when we take a step back and we're just talking about your everyday parenting arrangements, that's not the same. And so if you're just leaving a domestic violence relationship and you're scared for the safety of your children, number one, take some legal advice and find out what your obligations are, what your rights are, what you can and can't do, and find out what the risks are of the actions that you're thinking of taking. When we're talking about shared custody, if we're thinking of equal shared parenting arrangements, those types of arrangements are really only suitable for families where there's an amicable relationship between the parents, and the parents have the ability to co-parent. They get along with one another. They're not best buddies, but they can communicate in a civil manner, and the children can freely move from house to house. The situation can be fluid so that if something comes up, the other parent can step in and you can co-parent. Where there's family violence involved, that's a bit different because invariably there's going to be an imbalance of power in the relationship, prohibiting the parties from being able to co-parent. There's going to be one parent who's going to be subservient to the other in some respects because of the control the other parent will be exerting over the other. So shared parenting is really not appropriate where there are these issues of domestic violence. So where there are no orders in place, if you're scared for the safety of your children, you've got to take action to protect them, okay? The law says that children have the right to have a meaningful relationship with both parents, but they also have the right to be protected from harm. So if producing your children to your violent ex-partner is going to put them at risk of harm, you don't hand them over. And there's various mechanisms that you can put in place to enable the children to have the relationship with the other parent in a safe environment. So there are services like contact centres where they provide professional supervision. These centres are subsidised by the government, so they're not too expensive, and they can offer services whereby at changeover the parents arrive at different times, so they eliminate the risk of the parents crossing paths. Yeah. What we hear a lot of is a parent being bullied into producing the children, and that parent is so fearful of this other parent that they volunteer themselves to be a supervisor. And so then you have a victim of domestic violence coming along to a contact session with the children, with the perpetrator. And it's very unhealthy and it can be quite dangerous. So we always recommend that you don't do that, and that you look elsewhere to these subsidised services that are available to supervise the children.
That is just amazing information. And I think that from my point of view, one of the biggest questions to begin with, before all getting into all the nitty-gritty we've been talking about, was engaging a lawyer in the first place, being too scared to do it for fear of financial costs and, all the underlying things that creates. So you've already mentioned assistance in some way. Is there assistance in that area, or, what advice would you give to maybe someone in that situation who's just really scared due to financial reasons?
Yeah, it's a valid concern. Legal costs can be quite scary for anyone going through this situation, particularly for women who may have been stay-at-home mothers or just don't have access to the finances. So it's a valid concern. The good news is there is lots of assistance and resources out there to help people in that situation. I've got to say, my advice first and foremost is a lot of people, it seems, in an attempt to save on cost, seek out legal advice on social media. Now, this is a big no-no. And that is because there's a lot of people out there who have been through the process and offer up what they perceive to be as legal advice. It's based on their own situation, and it's almost always fundamentally flawed and incorrect. And so it's very dangerous to take legal advice from unqualified people, even if they've been through the situation. It's because the law is very complex when it comes to families, and each family is unique in its circumstances. So the law applies to those circumstances quite differently in varying ways. As I said, there are a lot of resources available that aren't going to break the bank. So first of all, if you're scared for your safety, you can certainly approach the police. They can apply for and obtain protective orders for you and your family without any cost to you. So usually what they have are domestic violence liaison officers that will assist you through the process, and it's the police who are the party in the court in the victim's stead. So they're the ones that apply for the order, and they're the ones that will speak in court. And there will be a time where the victim will need to speak in court, but for the most part, the police will do it for them without cost. So that's a really good resource that you can take advantage of if the situation arises. Aside from the police, there are plenty of state-based services that you can go to seek initial preliminary type advice. And it's good to do as much information gathering as possible, especially if you're looking to engage a lawyer. So then you can ask the questions, or the right questions, to get the answers that you need. So there's a legal aid office in every state, and they will have a telephone or a face-to-face duty service where you can call up or go in and take some free legal advice. As I said, it's initial advice, it's preliminary advice, but it's a really good start, and it's free.
Great place to start.
Yeah. Secondly, there are community legal centres in every state, and they're similar to legal aid. They provide advice. They don't usually provide representation, but again, you can book your appointment and go along, and after you've collected enough information, you'll be asking more pertinent questions, and you'll be able to get some of the answers that you need. There's also an advice line called Law Access, and you can call them for general legal advice and a lot of procedural advice. The courts actually also are a really good resource. They can assist you, if you're going through the courts, with procedural advice, not legal advice, but procedural advice. So which forms do you have to file? How do you fill them out? What are you supposed to put in this box and that box? So you can go to them. Legal aid do provide grants of aid. So if you meet their eligibility criteria, then you can actually have the government funding your lawyer.
Wow. So,
Yeah.
so what you're saying is there's plenty of help out there. So,
there is.
I would say that if someone needs assistance, that, there's no real reason for them to miss out, so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're looking at engaging a private lawyer and you're worried about the costs, all you need to do is have a really candid conversation with them about what the costs are. And there's various requirements for lawyers to set out what their costs are going to be. So you should be provided with written advice as to what the estimated legal fees are going to be. And then you can make an informed decision whether you want to go ahead with it or not. What we do is we work alongside some charities, and we provide initial advice sessions for free. A lot of lawyers do that, so you can call around and find that type of service as well. It's for preliminary advice, but it's a really good start.
Great. So there's always a good place to start. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, Kylie, you have given so much valuable information today. I just can't begin to say. So I have one last question, and I'm aware that it's an extremely broad one. So you answer it as best you can. So once someone has maybe engaged legal representation, what is the general process from there? And again, I recognise that that's a very broad question.
Yeah. Well, generally, first of all, you'll receive some advice. So you'll consult your lawyer. You'll tell them your background. You'll give them all the facts and the figures they need to then give you proper informed advice as to what the likely outcome would be if your matter did proceed to court. So then you can attempt to negotiate a settlement. And that's exactly what your lawyers should be doing. There should be a period whereby there's an informal attempt at negotiations with the lawyers talking amongst themselves, making offers of settlement and trying to resolve the case. Because as I said, if you can't resolve it and you're reliant on a court, you're going to be in litigation for a very, very long time. So after negotiations, if you still can't resolve a dispute after negotiations, then you can proceed to informal dispute resolution called mediation or family dispute resolution. And again, if there's issues of domestic violence, people will often feel, or the victim will feel, quite uncomfortable in attending a mediation with the other party, where even if they've got a lawyer present, they don't want to sit across the table facing their ex-partner who's assaulted them. And so what you can do is you can organise mediation as a shuttle. And what that means is that you sit with your lawyer in one room and the other party will sit with their lawyer in another room, and the mediator will go back and forth between the parties and try to resolve the dispute that way. It's always a good idea to try to mediate if you can. You really need a lawyer involved if there's been domestic violence so that there isn't that power imbalance. Otherwise, you might feel pressured to settle on terms that are not favourable to you.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. After all of that, if you still haven't settled, then you might need to proceed to court. And of course, if there are issues of urgency arising, you might need to go to court straight away. But usually with violence, you've got the protection that the police provide and the local courts. So you can have those protective orders in place. With children, you'll often have supervision in place so that the kids are safe from harm. And it's typically the property that's probably going to be the difficult one if there's no agreement on the property that you'll be needing to go to court. But of course, perpetrators of family violence rarely accept supervision because they don't understand, they don't think they've done anything wrong. And so if they don't agree to supervision, it will draw the case out, and eventually once the case gets to court, the court will impose supervision. Okay. And then once you're in court, you obtain an expert report or a court report from a counsellor attached to the court, and they assess the family and make recommendations about parenting arrangements. Once you've received that, then you can proceed to trial. But all of that does take a good 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, so there's a lot involved. So I suppose for our listeners, the thing we would say is that if you are in need of legal advice, don't be afraid to go and find someone. And in fact, that it is really important that you do, I would say, in that situation.
It's definitely important to at least take preliminary advice to set yourself up so you don't make mistakes at the beginning, particularly in these sorts of situations when it comes to children. If you withhold the children based on your fear for their safety, you'll quite often get a complaint levelled against you that you're alienating the children from the other parent. So you've got to be very careful about what steps you take and how you do it. So it's really important, at the very least, to take preliminary legal advice just to set you on the right path.
Wow, that is just amazing information, Kylie, and I really appreciate you giving it today. So, Kylie, is there anything else that you would like to say before we end the interview?
Just that if you are approaching a lawyer, you've got to feel comfortable with them. They're going to be your support for the next couple of years. If you're not comfortable with them or you don't have that close working relationship, find another one, because the issues that you're discussing with them are intimate issues of your personal life. And so you've got to feel like you've got a strong lawyer supporting you who really feels for you and you resonate with them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Kylie. Brilliant information. So if our listeners today out there may be in need of representation themselves, or they would like to get some advice for you in particular, how can they get in touch with you?
So they can go to our webpage, which is www.burkemangan.com.au, or they can call us. We're in New South Wales. But of course, family law is a federal jurisdiction. So it doesn't matter what state you're in, the advice is always going to be the same. So if anyone wants to contact us, they can contact us on our number. I'll give you our number. It's 0292382166.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being our guest today, Kylie. I really appreciate it, as I'm sure do our listeners. And all the best moving forward for you.
Thank you, Ali. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed today's show, and thanks for listening. If you would like to share your story of survival, or you have a topic you would like to hear about on the program, reach out to me via email welcome@themotivationmama.com, or find me, The Motivation Mama, on Instagram or Facebook. And don't forget, the greatest project that you will ever work on is you. Happy day, beautiful.